Hello and welcome to India's World, where today we turn our focus to Sri Lanka as a continuation of a discussion last week on China's growing strategic and economic influence. Now, alarm bells rang in India when Sri Lanka in fact leased its strategically important Hambantota port to a Chinese state-owned company for 99 years. China now doesn't just own 80% of the port, but has also won practically every infrastructure contract from Hambantota to Colombo. Now, while relations between India and Sri Lanka continue to be strong, New Delhi has been looking for ways to counter the growing Chinese influence in the country. And last month, reports claimed that Sri Lanka and India will form a joint venture to run the island's second international airport at Matala, an ambitious project that was launched about 4 years ago but failed to take off. Now, the question we're asking today is, can India match China in Sri Lanka's infrastructure market? Joining us on the show today, we have an esteemed panel. We've got former Foreign Secretary Shashank joining us here in studio, SD Muni, Distinguished Fellow at the Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, and Mr. S. Venkat Narayan of the Indian Bureau Chief, in fact, of the island newspaper in Sri Lanka. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me here. Venkat, sir, if I could start with you first and talking about that airport plan. What we do know for the moment is there's apparently a $290 million offer, in fact, that India has made to Sri Lanka. Can you give us some more details on what exactly is the progress?
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, this airport, which was started in 2013, and the then President Mahinda Rajapaksa named it after himself. He even had his own photographs on currency notes, so that's a different matter. So it is now said to be the world's emptiest airport. It has been running at a huge loss. The present government didn't know what to do about it. So in December last year, they decided to invite expressions of interest from people who want to run that. They received about 8 offers, but the government of Sri Lanka has decided to look into the offer made by India, which actually entails, India investing about $205 million, which would be 70% of the total expenditure involved. The remaining 30% will be borne or paid by the Sri Lankan government Civil Aviation Department. Most likely that will fructify, and the government of India, along with the Sri Lankan agency, wants to manage and operate it so that it becomes a profitable venture. So we'll have to see how it's going to work out.
Also, learn from the past mistakes of the past 4 years, how you've, of course, created an airport out of so much debt, but at the same time, nothing, of course, really worked on the ground. No profits at all, of course. In fact, no aircraft, in fact, landed there for days, in fact. Okay, Mr. Shashank, is this the right way forward for India to go ahead in Sri Lanka if it wants to counter China's presence in the region?
Well, the way Mr. Venkat Narayan has explained, if India were to follow the same thing, it will become like China. It will acquire a lot of property in Sri Lanka, which will not make any profit, but India will become a landowner in Sri Lanka. So this is what we used to say in the old days about the World Bank and IMF, that the more the developing countries go into debt, these World Bank and IMF institutions, they get higher and higher credit ratings and become AAA plus gold-plated organizations. So something like this is now happening to countries like China. And if India were to do it without actually really working along with Sri Lanka as to how to take advantage of the infrastructure which is being created apart from just getting a hold of the real estate there, I think they really need to do some serious thinking, because it's not just Sri Lanka, because China has done the same thing in other countries also. Whether Maldives, whether Bangladesh, whether Pakistan, Nepal, even
and in fact,
India, they are quite willing
a few
to
countries
do that.
in the African region as well. They are
Africa, of course, Africa, there are public demonstrations against China in many African countries.
Yes, absolutely. And now that you've mentioned Maldives, Professor Muni, unlike the Maldives, which seems to be pretty comfortable in this whole Chinese projects that have come over, the debt, they seem to be comfortable. They don't seem to be trying to get out of that, that whole vicious circle. But you know, you are seeing that at least you know, in Sri Lanka, the Sirisena government is still trying to fix its books. And in that sense, it's definitely a glimmer of hope for India, because in the Maldives, it seems like it's a lost cause. You know, you don't even have a prime minister visiting the Maldives, and we'll go into Maldives, you know, perhaps another week. But at least talking about Sri Lanka, you know, the very fact that the government there is still trying to clear that debt, it's still looking for other players, that's a good sign for India.
Well, it's a good sign for Sri Lanka, to put it this way.
Okay.
I would say that both India and Sri Lanka have been, both India and China have been involved in Sri Lanka's developmental exercise for a long time. The Chinese also started very early,
yes.
India also started very early in different ways. Unfortunately, the Chinese aggressive push into South Asia has almost alerted somebody. See, China built Bandar Naik Memorial Hall long back, which is a huge facility and complex. So it's not that the Chinese are entering for the first time, and we have seen them entering for the second time, and therefore we are competing it. In fact, we concentrated mostly in the Tamil areas. You know, what I have been a critic of this aspect, we never went into the Sinhala area, which is a majority area, and I think we continued to cultivate one constituency. The Chinese very smartly have gone into, and most of their projects now are in south, not in north and east, which is the Tamil dominated area, or even central. And we have also now started.
Yes.
Like,
we understand this airport is on the southern tip.
No, that's what
yes,
I am saying.
yes.
We have now started.
Yeah.
Not only airport, we have also done the road, the rail link from Colombo to one of the southern towns. And we are also doing projects in north and east, including airport, Trincomalee, roads and housing projects in a massive 50,000 houses to reconstruct for displaced Tamils and all that. So this competition actually is not only confined to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka manifests itself in a very strong way, because the way the Chinese moved into Sri Lanka under Rajapaksa, you would recall that even before the Sirisena government came to power, during the elections, the campaign issues were that Sri Lanka is being turned into a colony. The way Rajapaksa had gone and brought in Sri Lanka, and Rajapaksa did that largely because he thought in, you know, taking the LTTs and all that, he got a massive support from the Chinese,
yes.
Including in the defense sector, which is very vital. And therefore, the Chinese have cut a very neat deal with them, now making Sri Lanka totally dependent. And now you said Sirisena has tried to have diversified.
Fix its books to a certain
tried
extent.
it,
Yes.
but somehow the indications are that he has only been able to cover inches, not a large distance, because of the commitments made earlier by the previous government. For instance, for stopping some of these projects, either Hambantota, particularly the Colombo Port City project, the Chinese firm said you have to pay fine, which runs into millions of dollars, and Sri Lanka was in no position to pay fine. Therefore, it has to be renegotiated. They have tried and renegotiated. We don't want to go into the details of those terms. But as you said, yes, they are trying to, but they are in a kind of a groove where it is not very easy to wriggle out of the commitments which are very heavily been made in the past.
So where does the solution lie, Mr. Venkat Raman? Because it does, Venkat Narayan, sorry, does it, you know, good relations? Yes, that's good. I mean, India and Sri Lanka is sympathetic towards India. Any kind of projects, they look forward to it. Of course, Sri Lanka is looking for other players as well. They're open to, of course, investments. But if India has to get into that zone where, you know, compete with China on that scale, it has to, goodwill is not the way to go. It has to be hard cash. Is that the only way forward now?
See, we have already invested $2.5 billion in Sri Lanka, and many of our leading private companies are doing business, including the Tatas. They own a lot of teams. The IDSA is building a huge hotel in Colombo, facing the Indian Ocean. And see, we are not really into a competition with China as regards investment. You know, they're sitting on trillions of dollars worth of foreign exchange reserves.
Yes.
whereas our total foreign exchange reserve $400 billion. So it's not a question of our competing with them, but there is a lot of goodwill for India in Sri Lanka. The Buddhists admire India because the Buddha was, got his enlightenment in Gaya. And once Jayavardhana told me that I love India, I asked him why. Because India gave birth to the Buddha and Gandhi. That kind of goodwill still exists in Sri Lanka across the board. And because of the coalition politics during the Manmohan Singh government and all that, we could not get into the southern parts of Sri Lanka, and we concentrated on helping the Tamils in the north and east. But things are changing now, and we are doing a lot of work in the southern part of Sri Lanka also. And if we get this airport project, that will be a good thing for India. And we are developing the Trinco oil farm in collaboration with the Japanese. That still has to be worked out and all that. And Indian Oil and Sri Lankan Ceylon Petroleum Company, they have a fairly good joint venture going on in Sri Lanka. So our style of doing business is quite different from the Chinese.
Yes.
And China is looking at Sri Lanka as one of the countries for the OBOR, One Belt, One Road project, which involves 68 countries.
And that is what I was coming to is, yes, infrastructure of course is what we are discussing, but a lot of the focus earlier was on economically viable options, but now, with China strategically planning its, the ports and what it's going to be used at, there is in fact talk of perhaps it's going to change world, trade routes, in fact, Mr. Shashank. In that sense, then it becomes important where India is investing, where China is investing, because it's not just an economical project, it's something that could, perhaps speak larger volumes, as time progresses.
Yeah, well, we have to see that China really is preparing the groundwork for becoming the #1 economy and military power in the world by 2050. So firstly, at home, they have set up the whole machinery that Xi Jinping has been given another 5 years, and then they have announced by 2050 total revolution in their military affairs, everything. Then they have come up with this BRI initiative, which Venkat was just now talking about, 68 countries involved, and then they want to, so they are reviving memories of the old Silk Route, but actually it is really a new kind of a hegemonism which they want to establish over Asia, Africa, because they feel that this is the best time when President Trump has started talking of America first.
Yes.
When Britain is talking of Brexit, and the other continental Europe is talking how to send the refugees out of Europe and how to keep themselves away from terrorism. So therefore, things are moving so rapidly. I mean, India was at one time trying to have a non-aligned kind of a Indian Ocean, ocean of zone of peace and things of that kind. But now things are different. I mean, Indian Ocean, which is perhaps the only ocean named after a country, is becoming more and more like an American and Chinese theater of conflict.
Yes.
And where does that leave India and India's friends?
Yeah.
So therefore, we have to move very rapidly. You are talking about the money. Will money be enough? No, India would never be able to compete with China in matter of money. But Chinese also are guided by the fact that they have put about $400 billion in America on treasury bonds. Is that a very good investment? They think perhaps not.
Yes.
Because if the Americans devalue their currency, then that $400 billion might become zero. Therefore, much better to take land in Hambantota and land in Gwadar, land elsewhere. But that's cold comfort for India. I think what we have to do, as you said, that should be our policy.
Yes.
Firstly, tie up with other people who have deeper pockets than us. Secondly, we have tremendous goodwill. As Venkat said, that Buddha and Gandhi and all kinds of religious philosophies and very benign kind of our heritage. So we move on that basis, take into account the priorities set by people of these various countries in and around the Indian Ocean, and then prepare a good map say, okay, this is the, like with Japan, we said, okay, there will be a Asia-Africa growth corridor. Now, if we can build a little bit more into it and take advantage of Trump's visit to Asia, because what has been happening in the past, I mean, we lost out to China and Myanmar. We spent 30% of equity in a gas field in Bay of Bengal. And the Myanmaris kept waiting for a long, long time for India to pick up a connection from Myanmar to India to carry that gas. And we were just thinking, what would America think? What would Bangladesh think? What would Northeast be able to do? They have this corridors, Siliguri corridor. So we kept thinking, and they say, okay. And from next year, I think that gas will start moving to Kunming and to other parts of China. Iran, something similar was happening. So I must congratulate Sushma ji that she has used the priority given to Afghanistan in order to make Chabahar port functional. Can we do something like this with Myanmar, Thailand? Because Myanmar, they want to put sanctions once again and say military generals in Myanmar, we must put. Thailand also is under military generals. So Chinese have everything.
Trying to do business a bit more difficult.
You put any country under sanctions, bring out issues of human rights, Chinese will say, okay, this is the right time for us to take over that country. Is America aware of that? America is sitting far away. They are only bombing in Syria and Iraq and Libya. They must consult India if it is the defining partnership for this century. What is India's view about its neighborhood and Asia?
All right. Professor Muni, so does it mean that India needs to also change its strategy around the Indian Ocean region? You know, you can't just rely on a US and a Japan to flex its muscles against China once in a while, give it a warning, or for that matter, even expect, you know, Sri Lanka to stand up against China, because at the end of it, Sri Lanka is a much weaker country, smaller country, to a large extent reliant on, of course, China's resources and the money as well. So, you know, India on its own also needs to do some heavy lifting, and it needs to change its strategy, do you feel, around the region there?
I would understand that the strategy is already changing. You are right that seeking collaboration with other parties or third parties like Japan, Asian Development Bank, US, whatever. And we have done it in terms of projects which we have taken up, and it is true that financially nobody can match the Chinese. Nobody, I would say, not only India. Therefore, this is a hard reality. In Sri Lanka, for instance, of the total foreign debt or the money which they have borrowed, China stands at 28%. Asian Development Bank is hardly 18% or so, and India is 3%. So this is what the gap is, and you really can't match it. But besides taking the collaboration with the third countries, there are other aspects of foreign investments in any country, I would say. There are political aspects, there are, so far as India is concerned, in terms of our neighbors, and Sri Lanka included, I would say, not only exclusive case, we have suffered hugely on delivery deficit. We make promises, don't deliver on time. Even when we deliver, sometimes they grumble about the quality of
even Hambantota, Tota, I believe,
well, Hambantota was informally sounded. I know it very closely during Chandrika's time. Rajapaksa never offered it to India, though he has said that we offered, we mean Sri Lanka, not Rajapaksa. And Chandrika's time, it was only informally sounded. And I tell you, for good economic reasons, India was not interested in getting into Hambantota, because you have a port already in Colombo, which is defeating all the transactions which take place on Indian ports. Most of the Indian cargo goes to Colombo port for going to third countries. Now, why would you invest in another port in a neighboring country at the cost of developing your own infrastructure? You better, I mean, it is good that these days Sagarmala and others, we are developing our own ports, it's fair enough. So it did make an economic sense to go to Hambantota.
At that time,
we have got worried because the Chinese projects which are apparently commercial might and are being also used for strategic purposes. They are looking at it not only as a commercial facility but also as a strategic asset. This is where the problem arises. If it was simply a commercial, and therefore you have to work on several fronts. Mind it, the Chinese are also dabbling into internal politics of Sri Lanka. It is not a simple sign that Rajapaksa's son is arrested protesting against Indian project. It is not a simple sign, and Rajapaksa openly came out and said look, I was dethroned because India did not want me. Now, if this is where the politics come in, and this is where decisions are being influenced in one form or the other. So, I would say that so far as delivery deficit is concerned, we have to bridge it, and we have really to build up, because Venkat said rightly that yes, we have Buddhist and historical and civilizational connections. But don't forget, you talk to any Sri Lankan more than say 40 years of age, and he would remind you of IPKF. He would remind you of your support to the Tamils, and would say this is what you did, which is meaningless now. We have paid much more for that. We have done far more positive things for that, but still in the memories somehow, and politically motivated memories, these issues
remain
fresh.
And they get raked up each time.
We have to deal with this issue at various levels, I would say, in terms of our own efficiency, in terms of relating to the interest groups in Sri Lanka, relating to the stakeholders in Sri Lanka. Then only probably you can succeed in your overall strategic objective.
All right. Is that the way forward then, Mr. Shashank? Do you see, as far as India's strategy goes, we are talking about how infrastructure projects wise we can match up, or at least reach to a certain point where we can compete with China in Sri Lanka, so that it's not a neighbor that is again like, let's say, a Pakistan, where there's absolutely no way to work things out because China is totally in control there.
Yeah, I think we should try to isolate Pakistan as an exceptional case in South Asia, because they have totally tied themselves up with China.
Yes.
And they have received huge dividends from them, that they are protecting terrorist elements in Pakistan, both in China and in Pakistan government. But I think in other places, we should be able to tie up with other friends who have a very good image in Sri Lanka, Nepal and other places, and build infrastructure. As this delivery deficit should be taken care of, definitely. And we should make sure that we move rapidly, because an impression has to gain ground that India is moving rapidly, other countries are also moving rapidly. Only difference which I would have is either or kind of a thesis, that if we want to develop ourselves, we will not give it to anybody else. This has been the approach so far. We have to now have a dual approach, that we develop and we make other countries also develop, make them our development partners, and we tell them that unless they develop, we will not be able to develop. And vice versa.
All right. Mr. Venkat, when the Hambantota plan, was eventually sealed, we saw a lot of protests, of course, that took place. When this airport plan, of course, comes to being, when the details, of course, emerge even more, do we see that kind of feeling or that kind of protest as well, erupting in certain parts of Sri Lanka, that, you have these other countries who are coming and taking over our land? And do you think that may perhaps not be fruitful for India?
See, this has a lot to do with the politics of Sri Lanka, the protests against India. Namal leading a demonstration, against India getting involved there. Rajapaksa is trying to stage a comeback. So anything this government is doing, they try to oppose it. And so, that's one of the reasons. But the other thing is, the way we have to go forward in Sri Lanka is that there has been this Economic and Technological Cooperation Agreement, ETCA. It is being negotiated for many, many years, and it hasn't really reached a final stage, because the business community in Sri Lanka thinks that we will, affect their business.
Okay.
So ideally we should try and clear this ETCA agreement. We should move forward building the developing the Trinco oil farm with assistance from Japan. And I hope this airport in Matala will come India's way, even though it's not very clear at the moment whether it will be the Indian government who is going to invest this 205, or it's a private company. Company. So, like GMR was involved in Maldives and Istanbul and other places. We don't know yet. But either the government of India or a private party, but it's still Indian. So. And also this delivery aspect, we take too long. to kind of make things happen. So wherever, this is the case in Africa, this is the case in other parts of the world. Of course, in India also, we take too long, and if something we expect to finish in 100 crores, by the time we executed it, the cost gets doubled and all that.
All right.
We need to do something to convince Sri Lanka and other countries which look up to India for assistance or to face the Chinese and so on, that yes, if India says we will do something, they will do it, and they stick to a deadline by which they complete their project.
All right. That's a good way to sum it up. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on India as well on this particular issue. Next week, of course, we'll join you with another topic, but that's it for the moment. Thank you.